Here with Brian Behlendorf, who is pretty much a cat herder, aren't you?
Or cult leader, one of the
Cult
two.
leader. Well, it's both things, right? So he herds cultured cats. Brian was the lead on the Apache project. I guess still the biggest server.
Yeah,
in the world.
still more than half the websites on the
Yeah,
web.
yeah. And since that, had a company called CollabNet, which is designed to help herd cats inside companies doing big software projects, sort of SourceForge for pay. And but Brian's been really interested in this whole space. We've talked about this since 2003. So in this retrospective, we're saying, okay, from the 2003-4 timeframe, say in May of 2004, before the first PDF, what'd you expect to see? And has things come about that you expected? Have you had seen disappointments, and what hasn't happened? And what do you, given your background, what do you think is a way to make 2012 even better?
So in politics or in software?
In politics mostly, but
mostly.
Thinking of your software experience.
Sure. Well, it's always very challenging to try to map what I know of what works in successful open source projects to other parts of society, right? Because in open source, in the software projects, you have technical engineers who sit down and debate what's the algorithmically perfect way to solve a problem, and debate between that and the algorithmically most practical way to solve a problem, which often is very different. Or is that really a bug, or is that a feature, right? You know, these kinds of questions. And it seems easier sometimes to drive a consensus around an answer to one of these types of questions than it might be around farm policy, right? Or foreign policy. So I'd say, 2003 was obviously a very watershed year when it comes to politics, when it came to the history of the United States as well, and the invasion of Iraq. And I think a lot of us were at a point of somewhat near despondency when it came to, is there actually, are the representatives in government actually listening to those of us on the outside? I'd say there was probably a fair amount of hope at that point that the digital tools that allowed us to build these great pieces of software that allowed us to build the internet could potentially also help us to reinvent society, right? And I think that has happened to a pretty significant degree. I think today it is easier to form groups, easier to form interest groups than it's ever been, and we can see places where those interest groups have gone off and accomplished real things. But you still see a lot or hear a lot of kind of limitations to the effectiveness of just pure online debate. I think a lot of people mistook spending time sitting at their keyboards, pounding out, fierce replies to each other for getting something done. And I think today, 5 years later, I think we're a bit smarter about that. I see fewer people spending all their spare time in debate societies, and more people spending time out in, doing things that have a direct action. Like in San Francisco, there's a big group that promote the idea of urban vegetable gardens, right? Planting, even if it's just 10 square feet in your own backyard, which is about as much backyard as anybody has in San Francisco, and they're doing it, and they're sharing tips online about what to plant, what grows best in the fog, and making a big impact in that way. So, I see signs of hope. I don't know yet that we've really cracked how to get public policy and the policymakers to base their policy decisions on pulling together a consensus, or the word I just used was idiocracy, right? Of constituents in deciding which direction to go, right?
Expand on your concept a little bit.
Well,
what have you not seen from the Barack Obama campaign, for instance?
Well, let's just take any topic. Perhaps the one on my mind currently is FISA, right? The compromise that was recently struck. Well, what we haven't yet seen in that example is a candidate saying, here's a complex issue with pluses and minuses. In fact, one that's rapidly updating, right, with each new proposal. I haven't seen them yet say, why don't we farm out a conversation about this and then re-aggregate that back up into a recommendation, okay? And what I have seen are lots of debates that happen on various blogs, disconnected, people responding point to point perhaps about, oh, you said this or that or whatever, or what might be. But I haven't yet seen somebody actually coordinating a deliberation process that says, we need your ideas, let's pull them up, now let's have a structured conversation about options A, B, and C. And it could be this is the kind of thing that we're used to leaving up to the senators and congresspeople to do, right? But I think there's a lot of that kind of conversation, and if perhaps even say sausage making, that could happen more in the public. And I am really encouraged by efforts like Open Congress, encouraged by MetaVid. I don't know if you saw that. That's the project that takes C-SPAN footage and puts it online, indexable, and all that kind of of stuff. Yeah. So I'm encouraged by those kinds of tools, but it really will take deliberate action on the part of politicians and their campaigns, and even after they're elected, on the part of their staff, to engage the conversation, engage the population, their constituents, in structured conversation around issues that lead to particular policy.
Do you think small populations, maybe growing to large, could just do that without asking permission?
Oh, they certainly could, and that certainly happens. But if the politicians themselves were involved and had their staffs involved in managing those conversations, we could have, I think, a closer tie to accountability, right? I'm not saying that a politician should base their policy on what 51% of their people say they should do, right? I'm not even saying they should always, implement all the ideas that come up from the grassroots or anything. That would be completely impractical. But I am saying right now there's a disconnect. We really don't know how something like the FISA compromise comes from the conversations that happen in the blogosphere. Because what I see, and I've tried pretty hard not to get too much of a restricted slice, is that the conversation there was retroactive immunity for the telecom companies, no way. And if we have to do it, let's compromise for leaving the existing rules around warrants and wiretaps and such in place, which are if not even strengthening. As I understand it, the compromise wasn't really a compromise; it was a capitulation on both those matters. And we don't know where that decision came from. And maybe there's some things we won't know. Maybe it'll be based, inevitably based on polling or something like that. But it feels like there's a reality disconnect that still happens. And in an open source software project, what gets released on the ones that are run well, you can see that connection. This new feature was proposed by this person, was commented on by these others, was improved upon here. That's the chain that led to it being implemented. And when somebody says, well, this was a dumb idea, why did it get in there? We can point to that
What a trail back to it.
It's a trail, exactly. We lack that right now in politics.
How long do you think it'd take to develop something like that?
It could take an indefinite amount of time. It could take forever if no one's willing to step up and try it. That's, if somebody's doing that today, that's what we need to champion.
Brian Behlendorf, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.